Very much. Our next speaker is Kathrin Schwarz. She studied Jewish studies and history at the University of Basel and most recently received an MA in interdisciplinary research on anti-Semitism from the TU Berlin in 2024. She has worked as a curatorial assistant in the Neue Synagoge Berlin and is a freelancer on other projects on Jewish remembrance, culture, and history. Among others, Kathrin Schwarz was involved in the exhibition Frag nach, Digital Interactive Interviews in the Exile Archive 1933 to 1945 of the German National Library here in Frankfurt and the USC Shoah Foundation. Among her research interests are Jewish cultures of remembrance and its digital realizations and German language literature by Jewish authors from the 19th to 21st centuries. Today, Kathrin Schwarz is speaking about navigating boundaries, Frieda, Glücksmann, the Jüdische Frauenbund, and support networks in times of adversity. It's yours.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. You see the logo of the University of Basel because I came back to my alma mater and I'm now an assistant to Alfred Bodenheimer in Jewish literature now. So I hope you can see me now. So, perfect. Today I want to talk about a woman who might have considered herself as a feminist with Jewish identity and only later was a Jewish feminist, following our talk from yesterday evening. I'm talking about Frieda Glücksmann, her involvement with the League of Jewish Women, and how these networks can be traced and help to navigate boundaries. My thesis is both education and encounter, which the Jewish Women's League provided, gave the opportunity to build a strong and resilient network that helped women like Frieda Glücksmann to navigate their escape and that of others and build a new life in the 1930s. You could call it a network of knowledge if you want to. The way of education and gatherings and the letter, the newsletter of the Women's League are intertwined in this knowledge network. On the occasion on her 75th birthday, so you can see who she actually is. On the occasion of her 75th birthday in 1965, the first director of the Leo Baeck Institute in London, Robert Welch, referred to Frieda Glücksmann as the Duchess of Lenitz. Her Frieda Glücksmann was a German Jewish social worker. She was born as Frieda Lebrecht in 1819 in Breslau. Once again, Breslau. Her education resulted in working in the city administration of Breslau after 1919 while being married and having 3 children before she lost this position due to the National Socialists and moved with her children to Berlin in 1933 to find a new position. She was originally from a bourgeois family, which we can later discuss, but started to work since she was 16. Then she led the Jewish Educational Recreational Home in Lenitz. From 1933 to 1938, she transformed the house in Lenitz-Oranienburg, north of Berlin, into a meeting place during National Socialism, like the other places we already heard. Even in 1935, there we go, you can see the pictures of the home. Even in 1935, a synagogue was inaugurated in the former coal cellar. Additionally, there was a home economics school. Up to 40 female students received training there annually, while she increased her efforts to help them to emigrate. And with this education, they could get easier domestic permit to the UK, as some of you might know. I'm going to read to you translated excerpts of letters of Frieda Glücksmann and excerpts of Blätter, the newsletter of the Jewish Women's League, to show how these social networks maintain support and care, and that they became powerful tools not only for survival, but networks of knowledge, of interaction. So now we turn back to Frieda Glücksmann, and what led her to Lenitz. As a young woman, Glücksmann did a professional training in social work and went to Berlin, where she studied from 1915 to 1916 at the Social Pedagogical Seminar of Charlottenburg Youth Home von Anna von Gierke. After completing her exams as a school caretaker and youth leader, she returned to her hometown of then Breslau. As head of school child welfare in the youth welfare office of the city, she was part of the women like Paula Ollendorf who formed the city in the young Weimar Republic. By 1933, all Jewish employees in the city administration were dismissed due to the rise of National Socialism. Frieda Glücksmann went to Berlin with her children, already living separated of her husband Erich Glücksmann, who she had married in 1919 and divorced around 1934. Her professional experience enabled her to take over the management of the Lenitz Jewish Recreation Home, owned by the Jewish community of Berlin and the Jewish Women's League at the end of 1933. It was Bertha Falkenberg, the chairwoman of the Berlin branch, who convinced those responsible within the Jewish community to use the house in Lenitz for social and educational work. The home was officially opened on June 24, 1934. Glücksmann's role was multifaceted. She managed daily operations, provided emotional and practical support of residents, and this role should change over time, as she started by 1936, the latest, to undertake travels to different countries to look out for further possible immigration programs for her young women she was guarding over. Within Lenitz, she fostered a sense of community and solidarity. Conferences of the Women's League, but also other Jewish organizations took place, with even Martin Buber and Ernst Simon giving talks. In November 1937, Frieda Glücksmann wrote in one of her newsletters to the parents of the schoolgirls, "The alternation of practice and theory as it is carried out here seems sensible to me. The experiences are good. The girls are very interested in language lessons, Jewish history and German literature, despite the physically intense work. They had read and discussed Kabal and Liebe, Käthchen von Heilbronn and Nathan der Weise in a relative short time. Visits to Berlin museums and art history lectures complemented the cultural education. The necessary interest in current political issues was to be stimulated with Sunday newspaper reading sessions, this also helping to be up to date concerning immigration regulations." This change in school education, which Frieda Glücksmann reported back to the parents, followed a conference of the Jewish Women's League, which is reported in letter, as I'm going to read out to you. This is the edition 12, number 2, from February 1936. I should change my slide, sorry. So just to give you an impression of Lenitz. A demand of the conference in Lenitz, home economics training as part of girls' education. The conference, which took place from January 7 to 9 in Lenitz, home of the Berlin section, requires an evaluation for the tasks of Jewish parents concerning the changed future of the daughters, the status of the home economics education, and the trainings of teachers and educators. A huge part of this February 1936 edition was devoted to the educational opportunities of young women, especially home economics. As was usual at that time, children left school at about 15, as the young men at that time had a preparational education and training, vocational training, as a year to prepare them for future career. There is a sense of urgency when it is emphasized that professions could only be entered at the age of 18, as the letter states, and it was also the earliest age for immigration to be possible due to certificates, apart from the youth aliyah, as was stated. So there was a strong urge to create an educational program for young women, which was then the home economics schooling they could they could do at the Lenitz or other homes of the Jewish Women Leagues. Apart from this rescheduling and recreating the school system or schooling programs in Lenitz, Frieda Glücksmann undertook many travels. We have a document which was also a kind of report back to the Jewish community and the Women's League, which reports from her travels and the institutions she visited. For example, in Jerusalem in 1936, to see how the land was built up and which kinds of schools are training and preparing, especially girls and women. So she rides on board of a ship to Brindisi and from Brindisi to Jerusalem, which is especially interesting because she reflects her the influence of the Jewish Women's League on her and other women. So she meets other women there as well. So it shows the mobility that was in place there. The third woman, almost as nice as us, of the same kind, head of her economic office in Leipzig, formerly the Women's School in Berlin. Then she describes the seasickness, which was very heavy there on board. We, educated by the school of the Frauenbund, the Jewish Women's League, and purified by the Jewish Women's League, lie at night in our beds, which are also constantly moving, but we are unbothered. And at the end, she refers to Falkenberg. Best wishes to all. Mrs. Kaufmann, will Peter get to see the letter? Please, yes. Please give it to Mrs. Falkenberg too. Out of consideration, I won't end with shalom. This is like an inside joke between the board of the Jewish Women's League and Frieda Glücksmann, because they sometimes had different opinions on religious matters and Zionism. So you can see when you follow Frieda Glücksmann's lifeline or biography, you can see she only joined very late the Jewish Women's League. We don't know much about her Breslau time, but concerning that we don't have that much documentation and that she was working in the city administration, we can figure that she only found later to the Jewish identity or strengthened her Jewish identity, which I will talk more about in a second. So there is a later letter, a newsletter, in which she reports what she sees and what efforts are undertaken in Jerusalem, which I read some excerpts from. March 28, 1936. Very briefly, my impressions, not of the riches of Jerusalem, nothing of the Lenitz friends, of the children from my class whom I meet everywhere here, but only something quite factual about the life of the people here in the land of promise. Later on, technical difficulties are there to be overcome. I think the preliminary training needs to be much more overthought and with the right attitude towards the country. It is not enough that the domestic schools in Germany are equipped with technical gadgets. A way must be found to give the girls a skill that is adapted to the needs of the country. Example, dealing with kerosene stoves, working cleanly without using too much water. Help yourself. This subject must be incorporated into schools. And as a conclusion, a great deal was created 10 years ago from the most primitive beginnings. You become very small when you see what is being achieved here. Whether our German girls will be able to keep up will depend on our preparation, on the sense of responsibility and empathy of each individual. So these are only a small glimpse of her travels and her reports, the letters she reported back to about these efforts that were made. In these letters, we see a vivid portrayal of the physical and emotional toll of the persecution and the efforts. And the correspondence offers us a unique window into how she reflected and interacted in thought and word with the Jewish Women's League, and shows the elaborate connections outside Germany. Now, I want to take a broader look at the organizational network that supported Glücksmann here, or who she worked for. In the beginning, as Frieda lost her job, there was a sense of shock and new findings and rearranging with the new situation. In March 1933, Bertha Pappenheim wrote a letter to the Federal Board in which she pleaded for the next meeting of the League to be postponed indefinitely. I believe that we must first, each of us individually, at our traditional place of work, reconsider ourselves and our closest duties before we can dare, in the midst of the turbulence of events, to take a mental stand on the fate that we cannot yet grasp in terms of form and extent. In the same month, an article was published in the Blätter, in the newsletter, in which was implored to proudly profess their Judaism. So she, as the Jewess, after her inner return, it is almost no surprise that in the last years of her life, the lost Jewess also reconciles herself with her own Jewish fate and deeply recognizes, later on, what for so long of my life, for the life of the Jewess, was the greatest disgrace, the most bitter suffering and misfortune to be born a Jewess. I would not want to miss it now at any price. These two quotes reflect the mood of many Jewish women at the beginning of the Nazi regime. On the one hand, they waited anxiously and uncertainly for what was to come. On the other, they proudly professed their Jewishness, moved closer to their identity, and in a return to their roots, where they were maybe previously distant from Judaism, which applies to Frieda Glücksmann, but not for the women we heard before, of course, which helped build up the Jewish League. So after 1933, the work of the Jewish Women's League focused on intense cultural and educational work, and the vocational training and career, as we already heard, became more important, and also a topic for the Blätter of the newsletter. Especially after the Nuremberg Laws 1935, the League organized the flight of girls and women to Palestine, mandatory Palestine, the USA, and other possible countries of emigration, which was also the reason for Frieda and others to travel, like back in the days Berta Pappenheim did at the beginning of her work. And these identity discussions I had only touched upon changed over time. So there was another travel from Frieda Glücksmann, and before that, there was a final meeting in March 1938, a board meeting where I want to quote from, touching upon this identity discussions. Judaism as the basis of life, from the edition 14, number 5, 1938, from the conference in Lenitz. This year's General Board meeting of the Jewish Women's League took place in Lenitz, home of the GFB in Berlin, from March 27 to 30. In many respects, it presented the usual picture. Women from almost all parts of the country attended. They came to a home they had come to love, they found people they were familiar with, and so the first evening was characterized by warm, lively contact. However, 3 women were missing, 2 national chairwomen and Paula Ohlendorf. She wrote from Mandate Palestine and requested the League that they should join the Jewish Agency, which didn't happen. At the end, the text was entitled Judaism as Basis. The living conditions of people who emigrate or had emigrated were at the center of the conference, and whose life had changed dramatically. And although it took up a large part of their life, it's not enough as a foothold and needs more help to provide here. So that was one of the last conferences they had. And shortly after that, Frieda Glücksmann went on a trip to New York to seek ways of organizing an immigration program in groups rather than having only a few girls spread over several places, but failed due to the political circumstances. It was November 1938. News arrived from the pogrom of November 9th, 1938, as the house in Lenitz was raided and plundered and eventually shut down. The inhabitants could flee in time, which is another long story of its own. And Glücksmann was heading back to Europe, but sought refuge in London and continued to write letters to employees, students, friends, but also ministries and office workers, which is documented how unnerving that was for the ministries there. She already managed to bring her daughter to the UK in a Jewish family before 1938. Next, her son Peter to the Stotley Rough School in Hazelmere, led by Hilde Leon, who was active in the women's movement. And finally, Ernst, who joined a different school, both in 1939, just before the war broke out. Before that, Frieda Glücksmann sent both of her sons to a Quaker school in the Netherlands, which might might be an interesting topic to touch upon, because we talked yesterday about the interconfessional help and support with others, and the Quakers were a group who always appeared and helped and supported, although Frieda stated in her letters that she had was hesitant about that kind of help. Leon's friends and former colleagues were encouraged to refer and recommend Stoatley School, like the Quaker school was. It was crucial that members of the Frauenbund collaborated with counterparts in London and other parts of Europe and became a hub for several members who stayed here or moved to other countries. Members of the Frauenbund who had escaped could establish support systems to assist those still in Germany, organizing visas, funding, and other necessary resources. Glücksmann herself began her life in emigration by managing a hostel for 12 refugee children, Schlesinger's Hostel, as it became known, or to herself and the readers of her newsletters, Little Lenitz. With her colleague and closest friend, Edith Kaufmann, she got in contact with the family Schlesinger, who wanted to rescue Jewish children from Germany in 1938. So this is Hilde Leon, you can see, which has a connection to the Jugendheim Charlottenburg and Anna von Gierke, which Frieda Glücksmann also visited. And here is her time in London, and intertwining her experiences from Lenitz to the experiences in London. They managed to get nearly all the staff of Lenitz and later students, as far as we know, to be employed at the hostel or in places close by. Edith Kaufmann and her husband followed swiftly. She tried to help many more. Afterwards, she adapted the system she learned to work in the Jewish Women's League and in Lenitz after the hostel was closed down at the beginning of World War II. She led several houses for refugee children and women where they also got to learn what she thought could be useful for later life, like sewing and cobbling. Although we have some accounts of refugees who recounted that they never needed cobbling later on, but it helped keep them busy. More appreciated was the effort to pass on education and culture and music, and of course to help start a new life, and not the synagogue she helped to build up in that time. This was possible as the women were well aware and educated on the immigration regulations beforehand by the Blätter and the local network that formed a rescue line for these women. This is a fact we are well aware of, to quote Frieda Glücksmann, that they were well aware of, in her first free newsletter after the war. 31st October 1945, 26 Belsize Park, London. Dear all, now you are no longer isolated, you feel connected to the world again. You can not only think of your friends, you can also write to them how you feel without censor, without inhibition. In one respect, life has been made easy for me. I have had the privilege of being allowed to work from day one and to work in my line. I have also been spared the transition from lady of leisure to professional woman, as I have been working since I was 16. And she kept on working as long as possible until 1971 when she died, but restrained from her Jewish identity in her family, which was only a thing she enclosed to her friends like Edith Kaufmann and others. The Frauenbund thus acted as a support network that transcended borders. This network of solidarity helped and sustained their morale in the face of increasing isolation and despair. For Glücksmann, this meant having a broader base of support that could provide resources, guidance, and sometimes even pathways to safety. In conclusion, Frieda Glücksmann's way exemplifies the strength and resilience fostered through collective action and support networks. It would be interesting for further research to compare similar letters and reports with the Blätter of the Jewish Women Board and the documentation we have of the board meetings. Through her role at Lenitz and her involvement with the Jüdische Frauenbund, Glücksmann was able to provide more than just immediate aid. The network of knowledge helped her to help herself and others, the highest form of tzedakah, and the newsletters were close to the needs of the members, creating a lifeline to navigate the boundaries. Thank you very much.